To Open Arts. My name is Patty. I'm hosting today. Happy Tuesday. I hope everyone's having a sunny day inside despite this gloomy weather we have in New York City. I'm so excited to be welcoming back Will Curry to Open Arts. We're happy to have him back to share some poetry and some music. A little meditation here on this gloomy Tuesday afternoon. If you're just joining us for the first time, I encourage you to check out singforhope.org/openarts. Browse around. You can find the calendar at singforhope.org/calendar, where you can see all the great upcoming events we have on Open Arts. I also encourage you to visit singforhope.org/donate to learn how you can contribute to help keep the music going. And as always, Sing for Hope extends a special thank you to Unitex, a founding sponsor of Open Arts, for making this program possible. Unitex Healthcare Laundry Services is the largest family-owned and operated healthcare linen and uniform rental company in the country and has been serving the Northeast region for 100 years. We're very grateful for their generous support. So without further ado, Will Curry, how are you?
Hi.
It's great. It's great to have you back.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
This is the first time that Will and I are meeting, but I have watched your program before on the other side of the screen, so I have gotten to enjoy your poetry and your music before, and I'm happy to have you back.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll jump right in. So the way that this program works for me is it's a poetry and music pairing, much like, say, chocolate and wine, or anything like that. So it is, I will read a bit of poetry and then play a piece. You can enjoy the poetry and the music separately. You can enjoy the poetry and meditate on the poetry throughout the piece. In some instances, the piece is intended to bring out elements of the poetry. In some cases, it's intended to be the exact opposite and bring a nice foil to what you've heard. And today, all of the poetry is haiku, is all written by the Japanese poet Matsuo Basho, who was writing in the late 1600s. So we've got a lot of old poetry that's beautiful and very simple. For those who don't know, haiku are short 3-line poems, and the rhythm of the poetry lives within the syllables of the words. So sort of a basic format might be 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second line, 5 syllables in the third. They don't have to stick to that exactly, but that's what I'll be reading today. And before each piece, I will read, sticking with our theme of threes, 3 short haikus together. And again, all of the work is by Matsuo Basho. The first piece on the program is a Minuet by Luigi Baccarini, who was an Italian late Baroque, early classical composer. This piece was originally written for string quintet, 5 string instruments. In some cases, it's 2 violins, 2 violas, 1 cello, sometimes 2 violins, 1 viola, 2 cellos. But this has been rearranged for violin and piano. Felling a tree and seeing the cut end, tonight's moon. Autumn moonlight, a worm digs silently into the chestnut. A snowy morning, by myself, chewing on dried salmon. So I don't know if you noticed, and maybe we should have brought it up at the beginning, because we're going to hear something similar to this later on in the program, but this music is counted in three. It is a minuet. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If that sounds familiar, it might sound like a waltz, which came much later in music history and will also come later in the program.
Will, your combination of poetry and music. I've never thought about this when listening to music, but you have me thinking about it in terms of syllables in the music. I actually found myself. You described the haiku, which thank you for choosing probably the one type of poem that I'm familiar with from all sorts of class assignments and whatnot. But you had me thinking in terms of syllables. It's interesting to think that way. There's a certain rhythm that happens in the poem, and it was reflected in the music to me.
Yeah, it's actually why I love doing these pairings, because there is so much that music and poetry have in common, both in rhythm. That's why I often do programs not only with haiku, but say with Shakespeare or with older poetry that it has a sort of like 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 sort of rhythm built into the way it's spoken. And I think it brings a bit of a human quality to the music as well. You start to understand that music and language have so much in common. And another thing that I love with poetry as well is this idea of sort of storytelling and character, which goes really well with the next piece that I'm going to do on the program. The next piece is a piece by Antonin Dvorak. He was a Czech composer, but also spent a lot of time here in the US. He was very inspired by the American landscape. For those who are familiar with his Ninth Symphony, the New World Symphony, that was a piece written about his experience coming to America for the first time. And he actually spent some time living in New York as well. And so this is his Humoresque for violin and piano, and this is all about characters. You'll hear there are about 3 different characters that sort of interplay with one another throughout the work. First day of spring, I keep thinking about the end of autumn. Weathered bones on my mind, a wind-pierced body. Misty rain, can't see Fuji. Interesting.
Will, your violin playing is beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think actually, usually when I do these programs, I've done them on viola. I play both, and it just depends on, what I'm doing that week and what I'm feeling that day. And I've done a lot of these on viola, and I was like, why not do something different?
Switch it up. Is it difficult to switch between them?
Um, that also depends on the day.
Sure.
But yeah, there are subtle differences. I think to the normal viewer, you wouldn't necessarily see a difference, but there's some slight changes in playing. But much like I think sort of being bilingual, it's the same thing. You learn to sort of switch between languages, and it's the same thing. You learn to switch between violin and viola. You just have to make the conscious switch because to your brain they might feel the same when you pick it up.
Well, the playing is beautiful, and you actually have me thinking about what's really neat about this, about your combining poetry and music, is that you're actually combining different parts of the world, and you're combining different times. It's almost like a form of collage to me that you're combining these art forms that existed in completely different places and might never have touched if not for this program.
I had not thought about that. That's wonderful. Thank you for pointing that out. That's really great. Interestingly, while it's true, most of the music that I'm playing today is either Italian or German, some Czech. For those listening, you may recognize some of these pieces. Either you played them growing up, or you have young people in your life who play them growing up. All of this music comes out of the Suzuki violin method, which is a method of teaching violin that I teach currently, that I grew up learning as well, and it came from Japan, much like all of the haiku today. It came from Japan, albeit this came from Japan in the 1960s, as opposed to in the 1660s, as this poetry did. But it became very popular in the US in the 70s and 80s, and with the weather getting cooler outside, something about fall and starting the school year always makes me very nostalgic for a lot of the music that I learned growing up. And it's not that these pieces are any easier or childish. They're just they're just part of the repertoire that is part of this learning system. And I think very often a lot of this music is only ever played by 7-year-olds. And so I always love reminding people that it also has a life in the concert stage. It's not just for the classroom. There's just so much wonderful crossover there. The next piece is by J.S. Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. There'll be several pieces by Bach on the program, as is fitting for a violin recital. This is his Govat in D major. A Govat was another type of dance, much like the Minuet, very popular in the Baroque era as well. Sorry for the occasional dog barks in the background. My dog is a music lover as well, so thank goodness he hears a lot of it. So this is a Gavotte in D major by Johann Sebastian Bach. It was originally part of one of his orchestral suites, so just a collection of pieces for full orchestra, but has since been rearranged for violin. Many nights on the road, and not dead yet. The end of autumn. The sea darkening. The wild duck's call is faintly white. Another year gone. Hat in my hand. Sandals on my feet. So in that music, particularly, so we have a group of students who have joined us today. So I just want to say hello to our students who are joining us. I don't know if you noticed, a lot of that music repeats, right? So a lot of the material, I go back and I play it again. There's two reasons for that. First, it was a gavotte, so it was danced to. There's choreography. And this was a popular type of dance that most people knew how to do, right? If I asked you to do a gavotte right now, you wouldn't know what to do. I wouldn't know what to do, right? But in those days, most people in the court knew how to do a gavotte. And the gavotte required certain repetitions of steps and of sections and things like that, which is why the music would repeat. Also, there was repeats built into music because this was the time before recordings. So if you really liked what you heard, you couldn't go on to Spotify and listen to it again. You couldn't go buy the album. You couldn't do that. So they would repeat it so that you hearing it live would get a chance to hear the music a second time.
Will, can you imagine if Bach had had TikTok? He would have been tearing up the gavotte on TikTok.
He would have. That's so true. I wouldn't even know what to do.
The Govat challenge. It'd be the Govat challenge.
Indeed. I'm sure we can make. I'm sure
I bet
young people out there can make a Govat challenge happen.
we should bring it back. Yeah, it'll be the latest. Yeah, it could go viral.
Mm-hmm. Can you imagine?
Well, I have a question for you, and I hope it's not too challenging of a question. I was thinking about these poems. I imagine that they're translations from Japanese.
They are translations, yes.
So do you know, because the haiku revolves around syllables, so do they sacrifice the accuracy of the translation to preserve the right number of syllables, or will they flex on the syllables to preserve the accuracy of the translation?
I think they're flexing on the syllables to preserve sort of the imagery and and what's beautiful about haiku is it's such simple combinations of words that have like such profound that generate such profound imagery when you hear it. So I think the translator has tried to stick close to the haiku form, but I think is sacrificing a syllable or two to preserve the sort of the intensity of the imagery.
Sure.
Which again, I imagine, depending on your choice of translation, can go either way, right? You can choose to value one or the other. But I think as a musician, I really like that this particularly translator has chosen to value the imagery and sort of the inspiration behind each piece.
It's an interesting sort of open-ended question. I almost wonder if our viewers would have a thought on that. Is which one is more important to preserve? What is the poetry about? Is it about the flow, the syllables, or is it about the imagery? Thank you for I'm it's wonderful that you knew that. I'm glad that I didn't stump you.
No, I'm glad you asked. And it's something that I really hadn't put a lot of thought into, because I just liked the translation. I just liked the fact that the imagery was still preserved. I actually really love reading haiku, particularly like on the subway when I'm in transit. It's like little bite-sized like morsels that like I can get distracted by someone needing to squeeze by me or the door's opening or something like that, and then I can just come right back to the few lines that I was reading instead of being in the midst of a novel and being like, wait, what happened? So I really love reading haiku on the subway because it's a great way to like still get some like art in my life without needing to be focused so, intensely. Speaking of intense focus, the next piece is a full work. This is a concerto in A minor for violin and orchestra originally, in this case arranged for violin and piano, by the Italian composer Antonio Vivaldi. And when I say full work, it is 3 movements. And by movement, a movement is just a section of the piece. So it may sound like 3 songs, but the 3 songs or movements are intended to fit together as one larger work. So I'll read a bit of haiku at the beginning of the entire piece, but I will not read haiku in between each movement because I'd like you, making a larger metaphor here, think of this as sort of a larger haiku, right? The first movement is the first line, second movement is the second line, third movement is the third line. Each have their own thought, have their own set of imagery, but they belong together as one set. So I will not interrupt the set with any poetry in between. So this is Antonio Vivaldi's Concerto in A minor for violin. To many of you, this may sound very familiar. It has probably been played by millions of people over the course of the past, well, really hundreds of years since it was written, but particularly in the past 70 years when it's been really popularized. But it's one of those pieces that ever since I learned it as a 14, 15-year-old, I have never stopped playing it. It is still one of my favorites. So Antonio Vivaldi's Concerto in A minor for violin. I forgot to read poetry before I started. That was the whole point of the program. Spring, a nameless hill in the haze. The oak tree, not interested in cherry blossoms. At a shop for travelers, a bucket of azaleas. In its shadow, the woman tearing codfish.
Beautiful, beautiful performance.
Thank you. Ooh, I don't know what happened with the camera.
It's having trouble focusing on you. It's meditating on the music. The camera is meditating on the music, and it's getting a little zoned out.
Let's fix that for a second.
While you're looking at that, well, first I'll share. Edgar responded to one of our viewers responded to what we were talking about before the last piece, and said he agrees with you that imagery in poetry is the most important. That the right rhythm of syllables helps to strengthen the composition and make the poem sing.
Oh, I love that.
I think that might be true even when not discussing a translation. I think that might apply to poetry even in the native language that it's written in.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. Wow.
So Will, you're obviously a fabulous musician. I wonder, are you also a poet yourself?
I'm not a poet myself. I was thinking today, I was inspired reading some of the poetry being like, oh, maybe I should like write subway haiku. That's very niche, very New York. I'm not a poet. I never really considered myself a writer. But I don't know, maybe I feel like much like music, like the more you ingest, the more you learn, the more you feel comfortable with the language of music, you then feel comfortable creating in it in a different way. And maybe the more I read and the more I ingest in terms of poetry, the more I may feel comfortable writing on my own.
Well, and there's clearly such a tight relationship between poetry and music for you. So I have to imagine that at some point you're going to be listening or playing music, and you'll feel very inspired, and that's when you'll burst into poetry.
Exactly.
The moment is coming.
Yes. Stay tuned. Great. We're returning to the music of J.S. Bach with something very different from what we just heard. Much more grounded, much less excited. And this is a musette. There's something very pastoral about this piece, which I feel like goes really well with sort of the nature imagery that is so often present in haiku. A bee staggers out of the peony. When I looked under the hedge, the little grass called shepherd's purse was flowering. The old pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of water.
That was my favorite pairing so far.
I'm glad. Yes. Something very like pastoral and lovely.
And I almost think even if you hadn't read the haiku, I think it's what I would have been picturing. The imagery really matched the music. And I know we were talking about the imagery. A bee staggers. What a great word that you would never combine with I would never think to combine that with an insect, with a bee.
Right? Yeah. When I was reading that poem, I was very taken by that too.
Yeah.
And of course, to like pair it with peony as well, which is such a specific, first of all, very specific floral imagery, a specific flower that like you can very clearly see, but also like the way that word sounds and the way that word sort of lives in the mouth was another thing too that I was like, oh, what a great choice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think any other word besides staggers, it's this very lovely, innocent scene.
Yes.
But now the bee staggers out of the peony. I love that.
Yes, exactly.
Beautiful. Will, I think we probably have time for one more if you have one more to share.
Amazing. All All right, this is another, again, short and sweet, but probably one of my favorite songs that I teach to my students. When I'm teaching a class of younger kids, there's choreography involved with this, which I won't make you do. But that's not the intention of today's program. This is the theme from Witch's Dance by Nikolai Paganini, appropriate for the onset of what I call spooky season, as we're approaching Halloween, as the weather finally cools. I'm very much a fall lover, so loving this time of year. The piece Witch's Dance is actually a much larger, much more complicated work for solo violin. Paganini was a virtuoso violinist, and wrote a lot of incredibly difficult music for the violin. But this is just the theme from that piece. This sort of light, bubbly theme is tucked in amongst the insanity of the larger work. So this is theme from Witch's Dance by Paganini. And let's see, we're going to pair it with this one. The winter sun. On the horse's back, my frozen shadow. I don't know which tree it comes from, that fragrance. A petal shower of mountain roses and the sound of the rapids.
Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Will, I really enjoyed today. This was so. I have not explored poetry as much as I should have, and I think actually this is but I'm a musician, and I think this is an excellent sort of gateway for me almost to combine the two. So thank you so much for introducing me to this.
Of course, thank you. I've sort of fallen in love with this pairing. I think part of it was in college. I loved art song and lieder. Which unfortunately as a violinist I only ever get the melody of. I never get to incorporate the text, so this is my way at least of pulling the pieces apart and still getting to sort of marry those two worlds.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, you've given me an idea, which is that you mentioned how the haiku is such this beautiful sort of bite-sized piece of art to consume, and it's not too much commitment. It can happen even amid all this distraction. And I thought, it's funny that that doesn't seem to really exist with music. I'm not sure if I know of any artist that's making, say, bite-sized melodies or motifs that you can enjoy at a moment's notice. And I think there's something to explore there.
Speaking of TikTok, I mean that's the place.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's kind of the idea. Well, in social media in general, is that our attention spans are getting so short. So maybe there's something to that. Maybe if somebody's listening and feels inspired, there's an album of short melodic motifs. There's something to be said there. Well, Will, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed your work. Thank you for putting the work in to find these pairings for us. And thank you to everyone for joining us on this open arts program. I hope you all join us on the next one. If you go to singforhope.org/calendar, you can see all the great upcoming events we have. I encourage you to check out more and come back soon. And of course, don't forget to help us keep the music going if you visit singforhope.org/donate and learn how you can contribute to open arts. Thank you so much, Will. I hope you have a lovely afternoon. I can't wait until next time. And until then, maybe see you at another open arts program.
Indeed. Thank you so much.